Welcome to the Registered Investment Advisor Podcast, where financial services marketing expert Seth Green interviews experts, executives, and top producers to share can't-miss tips on how they successfully manage their financial service firms, grow their businesses, create great relationships, and influence the industry. And now, here's your host.
Hey, audience, today, welcome to the RIA podcast, co-hosted with Seth Green and myself, Carl McKinney. We have the unrivaled pleasure of having Dave Hamra from Gordian Advisors today. And listen, guys, buckle up. You're going to get a lot of information today. Dave has an illustrious history, and I'm going to try to get down and get all that good old information out. Now, Dave, your career has encompassed a number of different themes, and I want to take them one at a time. I want you to tell my audience how each theme played a pivotal role in your journey as a financial professional. Let's start with leadership.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. And illustrious is very generous, Carl. Thank you. I think that's being a little too kind. But leadership is important, and I think I've had the great honor of observing some really terrific leaders, and to be frank, some examples of folks that I would consider not great leaders. So it's the combination of those two things, really. And that's really informed how I try to deal with people and deal with my team and try to make it work as best we can. So the good leaders are rare, to be honest. And it's really gratifying to be able to work with those folks and observe how they work. And frankly, I think the main thing with those people has been that there is an obvious clarity to what they're doing, what they're trying to accomplish, how they conduct themselves with people. And that is probably the real key to those good leaders. Folks that I would consider not such great leaders either had that clarity, but it was not constructive, or perhaps didn't have that clarity. And that led to a lot of confusion, a lot of mistrust, if you will. And so those are really what have guided me.
It seems that there was something that was kind of a common thread in that, and it's the next kind of theme I want to ask you about: communication.
Yes. And again, clarity I think is helpful there. Understanding the audience is very, very important. Understanding half of what we do as planners, as we often say, is counseling. We're not necessarily trained as counselors, but the core of that counseling is that communication and presenting ideas, findings in terms that people can understand and use. And that really boils down to communication. And one of the beauties of what I've been doing for the last 20 years is, and I always say this, you can approach it from so many different directions. So many different kinds of personalities, kinds of approaches, kinds of emphases in terms of how people want to interact. And that's great. It leaves a lot of room for a lot of different kind of people, which I think makes for a better overall field. But for us, and for me in particular, it really comes down to trying to put those things in terms of what people can understand. I can do the analytical stuff. I've always been good with numbers, but that isn't what I lead with. I tend to lead with trying to present the concepts in terms of what people can understand and use.
No, you kind of took the next one right away. You took care of the client relations question. So I want to ask you about navigating change. How has that played a pivotal role in your journey?
The only thing constant is change, right? And I've told my younger partners, and I have the great benefit of been very, very, very lucky. Been working on transitioning the practice for the last 10 years, really ramped it up in the last 3 years. So I'm on the transition to retirement, as is a lot of, I'm typical of the profession. I'm an old white guy. And so we have been working very, very hard on that. So the change has been pretty significant over those 20 years, really have solidified. And I think it really has to do with solidifying how we want to focus on comprehensive financial planning that de-emphasizes the investment side. And I'm happy to talk about that. But really where we think our value added is in all the other financial issues. And as you can imagine, that has been a change and will continue to be a change. And I've told my younger partners, look, the practice the way it is will get me through. Will certainly get me through my retirement phase. It will get me through whatever period of time our financial arrangement is. But for you, it will change a lot. I don't know what that change will be, but you have to be ready for that. And you have to be able to adapt for that. And whether it's something that's driven out of artificial intelligence, who knows? It will change. And the investment landscape could change. I mean, the investment landscape, I think, has changed dramatically for planners like us in the time that I've been practicing. So it will change, and you have to be ready for it, or you just have to accept that I'm willing to let what I'm doing sort of die on the vine, and whatever that means to me, I can do it.
Okay. You mentioned you're willing to talk about de-emphasizing the financial side. If I quote you correctly.
Not the financial side, the investment side.
Investment side. Okay.
And so what we basically present to people is we flip the horse and the cart a little bit here. And so investment strategy is not our leading value proposition. We are willing to take what the markets give us, and that supports our long-term strategic investment approach and where we think the value is added. And of course, investment management is a large part of what we do for our clients, but it's part of the overall broader service. And that's what we really emphasize for people. And frankly, part of that is from the investment perspective, protecting people from themselves and protecting people from all the other noise that's out there, the next bright, shiny thing, whatever you want to call it, the next thing that will pop up on today's feed about what somebody should be doing with their investments because of the Fed statement or Pickett. There's a million things. Doesn't matter what it is. It will prompt some bold headline about what to do and all those kinds of things. And we try to really walk people back from that as much as we can, because really what it ends up doing, of course, is just creating anxiety and doubt for people about their future. And that's what we're trying to diminish for them as best we can.
No, that's a great answer, and I'm sure my audience is going to appreciate it. Some of our people are going to be RIAs, but we have a lot of people that are going to turn to this podcast to look for you, to look for a great financial planner to help them out. And you had the opportunity to work the Vanguard Group, starting as assistant to Jack Bogle. When I grow up, I want to be like you. I mean, can you share some insights and lessons that you gained from your time at Vanguard?
Jack's probably the best example of that clarity that I referred to earlier. And I always say that Jack did not have an insincere bone in his body. You never had any doubt where he was coming from. You never had any doubt what his objectives were. You never had any doubt about what was driving that. And that was just such a refreshing environment to be in and to work in, and to try to continue to communicate that to other people. And I still say I'm a Vanguard guy, euphemistically speaking. Obviously, I'm not there and haven't been there for a long time. But in terms of the principles, cost matters, of course, that there's a consistency and definitely a consistency in the investment strategy and objectives, and having nothing but integrity in how you deal with people. And those are, I think, invaluable in doing what we do. And I could tell you lots of stories, but we don't really have time for that.
Well, we'll have you back on. I want to hear some of those stories. Now, you've been involved in some institutional investing and 401k sponsors and the like.
Yeah.
What are some key challenges and considerations when managing investments for institutional investors?
Well, on the institutional side, I think and I've continued to see this. I've been involved with some nonprofits and some other kind of folks. And sometimes I think on the investment side, obviously any institutional investment manager has their style. They have their goals. They have their place in the market, and they are selling that. And that's great. I have no problem with that whatsoever. And they present that as best they can and how it fits into a broader strategy for whether it is individuals, whether it's corporations, foundations, retirement plans, pension plans, doesn't matter how it fits in there. On the smaller side, however, I think I've seen people drift a little bit in terms of just, oh, we should be more sophisticated now, when I don't necessarily think they have to be. So there's a huge difference between a multi-billion-dollar institutional investor and the $50 million endowment or foundation, and what I think they need to do, and sometimes what they're doing. And I think folks get to a certain point and they're told, or they think that they need to be much more sophisticated necessarily than they have to be. And it takes on a life of its own. The institutional side is obviously quite different than what we're doing now. And it definitely allows for a lot more of those more specialized investment strategies that we would never consider using for individuals.
Makes all the sense in the world. Now, your experience, kind of a startup, but not quite a startup. You established Vanguard's first satellite office, and you started up your own firm. So you've been involved in that seed stage, that beginning stage. Tell us about some challenges and some success stories when you were doing those couple of.
The Vanguard, and I wasn't the lead guy on that. I was part of the team.
Okay.
And obviously it's been a huge success. I just actually talked to the Vanguard folks last week. I think they have over 3,000 people up in that office now. And we started with 20 people that came from, as I call it, the mothership, from Vanguard headquarters, and we hired 20 people locally. So that was the start. It was 40 people, and it's grown dramatically, and they have quite a presence up there in the Scottsdale, Phoenix area. So it's gone really well as it's grown with the rest of the company. On an individual basis, I asked myself, and somehow I came to this quite a while ago. I try to ask myself what the next decision, if I'm trying to make a decision about myself, what might the next decision after that be? And when you're starting out on your own, an obvious question is, what if this doesn't work? And I asked myself the question, and the answer, to be honest with you, was, I don't know, but I'll figure it out, because I had other changes in my career and personal and professional lives, and figured it out. And I was okay with that. I was comfortable with that. Obviously, I hoped that it would succeed. I expected that it would succeed, but if it didn't, I was okay. I felt that I had enough to offer that I would be able to make my way. And it took several years. And for any of your listeners out there that are thinking of going independent, first of all, it's fantastic. It's if you're comfortable working on your own or working in a smaller environment, and that is different than a larger organization, no question. You have to be the do-it-all person. But the independence, the control that it gives you is fantastic. But you have to be comfortable with that. I also, to be honest with you, because of some personal situations, I started from scratch, zero, and lived off of my retirement account for a while, which is the last thing, absolute last thing any financial planner would suggest that you do. That we would cringe if somebody said, "Oh, I think I'll start a new business, and I'm in my mid-40s, and I think I'll live off my retirement account." We would just fall out of our chair. The rationalization, of course, was I was paying the penalty. Of course, if you're in your mid-40s, you're paying a penalty. But I saw it as making a different type of investment. Obviously, my retirement account was invested. I saw that I was invested in something that I would have lasting value. And now, 21 years later, it does. And I've reached the point where I can start to realize that value to some degree. So it's all worked out. But yeah, it's a scary leap. No question about it. It's a scary leap. And if you can start with something less than zero, that's a good idea.
I can imagine. Now, you seem to have the Midas touch. When you were chief administrative officer at Bradford and Marzek, you were part of a team that grew that thing from about $3.5 billion to $6 billion, I believe.
Yeah,
the numbers are correct. Tell me about that. Tell me about the successes. Tell me about the challenges. And
the challenge is really, and so in a firm like that, which you'd call a still small but medium size, if you will, attracting the right talent was always a challenge. On the CFA side, a chartered financial analyst side, and trying to find those folks to come in and work in a smaller firm where there is a difference there between being your own shop and working in a firm where there's 6 or 8 really high level professionals. That was definitely a challenge. Managing the growth, it was a bit of a sweet spot. So in all fairness, that growth, it was a sweet spot for the bond market during those years. And as long as you were it's when that it was in the middle of that long-term downward trend for interest rates. And as long as you were long the index, you were putting up some pretty good performance numbers because the benchmark was the index. And if you were long the index in your portfolio, you were beating the index. So it was a good time for bond managers. But the growth was a challenge, and bringing on that much new business, maintaining the talent roster. It was interesting. I will tell one story. 3 years later, a friend of mine who was still working there, the person that had taken my job, when I left, the owners of the firm approached him about reducing his pay, and they basically said, well, you don't do as much as the last guy did. So I guess I was doing things that my successor wasn't doing, which I think they found worthwhile.
So you overcame those challenges tremendously. And I guess returning to Arizona in 99, you joined the Greenberg Financial Group.
Yes.
So I'm imagining that you took all of those experiences and all that diverse stuff forward and used it there. Tell me how that influenced your approach to financial advising at that time.
Well, that really propelled me to doing my own thing. Small firm, Tucson's a great place, but if you need to make a certain living, it's even more so then. It can be a tricky place to find the kind of work that you are looking to do and to make a certain living. So, but I took a significant pay cut. I came back. My kids live in Tucson. So that's was the real driver behind coming to Tucson, and was with Greenberg for about 3 years, went through an SEC audit, a FINRA audit, had been through that before. Really just decided that if I wanted my future livelihood in somebody's hands, it might as well be in my own. Those 3 years sort of reinforced that idea for me. And then I had great support from, wasn't my wife at the time, but is my wife now, in terms of encouraging me to make that transition. And it just gave me the opportunity to communicate and work with people in the way that fit me so much better than I was able to do there. So that was the real transition there. But it got me to Tucson, showed me a little bit more about what a smaller local firm is like, and got me that introduction to sort of Tucson people, and who are great, by the way. But there's a certain vibe here, and Tucson attracts people that appreciate that vibe. So having a practice that meshes with that kind of mentality is very important.
Fast forward 3 years into it, you founded Gordian Advisors with a kind of a focus on interactive client education. Can you explain your philosophy behind offering an alternative to traditional financial advice?
Again, it's obviously not about product because we're fee only. That's the first thing. It's also about being the decision makers, which is great. All the independent folks out there understand that. And it's also about sifting through and, again, trying to focus on exactly what people's concerns are. We tell people all the time, look, although we have a very high level strategic, consistent, long-term investment approach, we spend a lot of time understanding what's going on in the markets, what kind of investment opportunities are out there, all those kinds of things. They don't necessarily show up in our changes to our portfolio, but we know that we can have those conversations because our clients will come to us with questions about that, whether they've read it, whether they have an interest, whether the friend, I just made air quotes because the friend is usually not very helpful, right? They come to us with those questions, and that's true about all kinds of things. So it all falls back on knowing what the client is about. We have somebody call us up and say, hey, for whatever reason, what about ABC? And we often say, well, that's great if you want to accomplish these three things. What we've talked about and what we know, you've never indicated that any of those three things are things that you need or are interested in. Has that changed? No, that hasn't changed. Okay, so that's not for you, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about why it can be a good idea for people in different circumstances. So that's the kind of educational conversation we like to have. We won't just dismiss it because we want people to understand. Does it may come back to them again, and it may come back to us again. So we want them to understand, but it really is taking the time to help them focus on what their circumstances are and the kinds of things that can help them in their circumstances. I will admit we do have a bias to simplicity. So many of the options that are out there can work, but you give something up in those. There's always those trade-offs. And we talked a lot about, we educated people a lot about those trade-offs, and the industry, even fee-only people tend to talk too much about, not too much necessarily, but they tend to focus on product advantages and not necessarily on product disadvantages, if you will, or what those trade-offs might be. So we really focus on the trade-offs and try to help people make the best decisions they can for themselves. We're happy to offer an opinion. A lot of times people will say, oh, I see all these things you're laying out for me. What would you suggest that we do? And we'll offer them an opinion. But at the end of the conversation, they make the decision. As long as they don't make a decision that we think is really dangerous for them, we're fine. We can work with that, and we'll continue from there.
It seems that you kind of educate the clients so they understand the real why this is a good decision, this investment is a good decision, as opposed to I've heard people say, well, my planner said do it, or my advisor said do it, but they don't understand the reasoning behind that, and that's very valuable to a client, I would imagine. I know I would feel loved if I had an advisor that took that kind of time with me. Now, you as a certified financial planner, that designation means a great deal. Can you share with my listeners and viewers how that separates you from the pack, if you will?
I think it's an introduction. I mean, I think it has to be backed up by all the things we've been talking about. Any reasonably intelligent person can become a CFP, but I think it is that initial screen. Obviously, there's some CEs, but let's be honest, some of those are less valuable than others. But I think it's a worthwhile screen. I think it demonstrates a commitment to planning. It demonstrates that it's just not a tack on. I'm an investment person, and by the way, I'm happy to talk about your estate plan issues. No, that's not what we're about. All those things have equal importance in what we do with people. And so I think the CFP is important in that regard. Obviously, there's been a lot, and that talk about change, lots of discussion, lots of change over the years on how the CFP board and the CFP standards have evolved, how they want to present themselves, who can be a CFP, what kind of circumstances they're in, and so forth. I think it's tough. I think as a CFP, I don't know. I think it would be extremely difficult for people to be in a dual registrant position as a CFP, because you're changing the hats, and that's difficult for the client. It has to be difficult for the practitioner. I don't know how people really do it, but they do it, and they do it properly as far as regulations are concerned, but it's a challenge.
This next question is kind of interesting. Quick background, 20 seconds or so. I have a very good friend I went to high school with, and he and I both got an award this past weekend, and he's president at University of Dayton, but he is a rocket scientist. So, and I talked to him about it, and I'm curious to get your take. You're an adjunct professor of personal and family planning at University of Arizona. Now, what motivates you to take on the financial planning to kind of a straight educational role with literal students, as opposed to your clients who are students to you?
Yeah, and I'm not doing that anymore. I did it for 2 terms, and the first 2 terms, but that's fine. It was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, my second term was when COVID hit, so we had to finish the term through Zoom, and that was less fun for me. And really, the program was getting up and running. I knew the director, and they were looking for folks to serve as adjunct professors, and it was great. The first term, I only had 3 students, and as an instructor, I was determined to make sure those 3 students not only passed, but got what they needed. The next class I had 20, so quite different, quite a larger variety, and really trying to take that information, which can be quite dry, and try to translate it into things that are of interest to them and that I think are useful of them. So it was a balance between what you have to learn for purposes of the course. It met the CFP standards for investments, and then of course wanted to prepare them to be able to pass the CFP exam. So and I think this is typical in a lot of cases, especially professional type education, things you have to cover, but things that are more real world, and really was a combination of those two things. And I tried to, and one of the challenges, Carl, to be honest with you, and maybe this is generational, I don't know. I've talked to some students about this. The students seem to be much more reluctant to ask a question than I recall from when I was a student. And part of that was they did not want to appear not to be knowledgeable of the information. And as much as I would say there is no stupid question, if you have this question, I guarantee you half of your classmates have this question. There's value in asking and exploring the question. There's always great value in that, because that will take us to places that maybe weren't presented as clearly as they should have been, or again, worthwhile to the class. Just a real struggle in getting people to ask questions. So as a person who, that is my main way of learning, that was the biggest challenge for me, to be honest with you.
Well, work-life balance is important, and I see your involvement in service organizations. And if I get the pronunciation wrong, forgive me. The Friends of the Saguaro National Parks.
Yes.
Yeah, and that kind of shows your commitment to your community. And you mentioned the vibe and how you like being there. Tell me how you balance the two. I know it's the work can get kind of demanding, and
we've actually structured our practice. And again, we freely recognize and acknowledge that our practice is inefficient, because the three of us work as a team with all of our clients. We don't have Dave clients or Dennis's clients or JD's clients. We work as a team with everybody, which means our capacity is maybe not as great as it would be if you have, I don't know, from other RIAs or planners you've talked to, what they think their capacity per professional might be. For us, we work with everybody as a team, and that's, I think the idea of a lifestyle practice is a bit of a derogatory term, but we think it's a positive because it's a win-win-win for everybody. It's a win for us. It's a win for our clients. It's a win for the community if we're involved. It's a win for our families. We do fine financially. We're not trying to necessarily squeeze every last nickel out of our practice. What we're trying to do is have that relationship with the clients that we do have, continue to grow organically, build a good life for ourselves, help them live their lives with a lot less financial anxiety, which is our shared goal. So we think that works. But again, from a MBA or Consulting 101 point of view, it is inefficient. We could do more, but we think this works really, really well, and we'll continue to do this. So all that is the answer to how do we balance that? That's how we balance that. So everybody can go to any of the three of us at any time.
In your inefficiency, you found the secret sauce to success. So I commend you for that. And in your successes, what's your biggest challenge today?
I'll spend my time in retirement. No, everybody says, oh, you have to be careful about that. I don't think it'll be a problem. I've had a great role model in my wife. I've got a lot of interest. I've already picked up some new things. So professionally, I think the biggest challenge is, as we discussed earlier, is change. And if our core client base is the 60 plus individual or married couple, obviously you need to understand that demographic, as people age and as new people come into the demographic who have very different life experiences, very different professional experiences, very different expectations and goals, we have to change with that. So I really think that's the key, is just knowing that, this, sadly, our business has a built-in turnover because people do pass away. And you have to really replenish the client base. But again, those people are different than the people you started with 15 years ago in terms of their experience and expectations. So you have to be ready for that. And we've already seen that. We have a number of clients who are well below 60, still working professionals, and they are quite different than our 65-year-old client. Quite different.
And listen, I want you to tell my audience how to reach you guys. What's the best way?
Very, very easy. GordianAdvisors.com. It's advisors with an O. And I will say people either know where the Gordian comes from or they ask, which is good. It has to do with the Gordian knot. And I always thought if I had my own business, it would be named for something regarding Gordian. or small pond, like big fish in a small pond. But small pond is not a good image for something financial. So I went with Gordian instead of my name. So GordianAdvisors.com is the best way to reach us. You can find out everything you need to know about us there.
We're close. Unpack that a little more. Tell me more about the name Gordian.
Well, as I said, either people they get it, they know the story of the Gordian knot, or they ask the question. So the whole idea is ancient Greece, the oracle said that the next person that comes up to the temple will be the ruler, and it was this peasant named Gordius. He became the ruler, was a great ruler. So he ties a knot in his cart, and then the oracle says whoever can untie that knot will not only be the ruler of that town, but the ruler of all Asia. So everybody's trying to untie this leather knot that's on his cart. Nobody can do it. Alexander the Great comes by, tries to untie it, can't, but he just takes out his sword and cuts the knot open. So the whole idea, there's a lot of different images there, but the idea is really to cut through and get straight to the solution, and not to be too tied up in what seem to be problems.
Well, there you have it for my audience. I'd like to thank Dave Hamra from Gordian Advisors for joining us today. And this has been Carl McKinney, co-hosting with Seth Green, the RIA podcast. We will speak to you or see you the next time. Have a great one.
Take care.
49 faces looked to him in triumph. Over the last 12 months, they had each taken turns and promoted his business for a week at a time, driving over $987,342 in revenue. What if you had a network of 50 centers of influence who promoted your business every week for a year? Grab your copy of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Ultimate Guide to Growing Your Business with a Podcast, at 33% off the Amazon price by going to ultimatepodcastbook.com. Again, that website for 33% off the Amazon price is ultimatepodcastbook.com.